That's cool.
Yeah.
Right, I think we are now live. So, welcome everyone to the fourth day of the Writer's Lost Party. Today's session is titled Preserving What Makes us understanding music and pop culture. I am joined by two very talented and very accomplished people. First, we have Natasha Noorani. She is a musician based behind the Lahore, and she also currently works on a project called Peshkash, which is there to preserve old music records of Pakistani music. And we also have us today Anurag Tagat. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name for a senior writer who first post and we have so multiple today. Yeah. And so I'm firstly going to say thank you for joining me for this session. I am very happy and very excited for this particular talk today. Um, Firstly, I would want to talk about both of you have sort of experienced culture in very different ways. Natasha, obviously, through her work with the festival and generally as a musician, and Anurag as someone who comments and writes about culture. How do you see culture, music, pop culture today, and how have you seen it change in the last, let's say, 10 years?
Anurag, go for it.
Oh, I think out here in India and stuff like it, you definitely seen one of the most obvious sort of things that has seeped into it is technology, which is something like you're very much seeing like right now in action, considering we're in a Zoom meeting. Like just the fact that how much technology has seeped into shaping culture, just like how culture is consumed and distributed. Even I think like that's been one of the major like sort of things that I've chased and just sort of like tried to write several like sort of trend stories about and figure out like where it's going. So definitely that for one. And I guess the other one is that like I think before there was whatever you used to see was kind of scattered in a sense, like at least of course there were cultural bodies, and of course there were government backed cultural offices and things like that, and there still are in India. But I feel like slowly the infrastructure and the ecosystem has sort of become a little more solid. It's become a little more organized, so to speak. So that sense of community is really starting to show now more than before.
Yeah, and I think in Pakistan, I feel like 10 years ago, as Anurag mentioned, technology, we were still struggling. We were kind of trying to get out of TV and the loss of TV channels. And also 10 years ago, there was, security threats. So concerts, etc., had shut down. Now concerts, etc., have shut down for health reasons. But until at least earlier this year, you had a lot more activity in terms of performance spaces, different bodies that hold events in Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad. So there had been like an influx of both musicians and as Anurag said, infrastructure had been developing, although far more slowly on this end of the border, but still happening, which was quite massive. And some people are still trying. At the very least, I still feel like music is definitely scattered. Like it's very hard to kind of curate Pakistani music or to find the latest or just have like an amalgamation of that of what's happening, but it's definitely a
Mhm.
lot easier to pursue music as an artist than it was 10 years ago in terms of having your music come across to people and develop a fan following because Instagram didn't exist 10 years ago. So, I mean, it helped. Or did it? I don't know. I wasn't using it 10 years ago.
It's funny that you mentioned Instagram because the conversation we were having yesterday about publishing also revolved around how Instagram sort of made it so that people who create content or create their craft have to exist online on social media to get their image across, to get their brand across. And that's something we've seen quite a lot with music. Of course, musicians have to be online, they have to present their brand. How do you see that playing in when it comes to generally? Have you seen it positively affecting music, or have you seen it sort of not negatively, but how do you overall see Instagram's effect, particularly for South Asian musicians and their visibility?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the one of the major like game changers, so to speak, has been TikTok, right? Like it's just when I mean, like of course you asked about Instagram, but I feel like what Instagram is doing now with Reels, for example, is pretty much what TikTok started, right? And before that there was Dub Shots and those kind of apps that were really sort of changing the way regular people consume music. Like somehow for some reason they wanted to like mimic it in a sense, right? Like they wanted to have the music literally be the soundtrack of their life, and they sort of showed that, which is what I guess TikTok was sometimes about. So, and of course, as you know, TikTok is banned in India now, so it's quite, again, like we're seeing like a lot of flux in these sort of situations, but at the same time, yeah, like definitely it's a like it's changed the way musicians even think about music, for sure. Like there's a lot of people who think about the social media campaign for a track or for like a music video even before they sometimes even finish a song. Like sometimes like the germination will of some music is actually in a social media campaign. So it's quite interesting to see that change.
No, absolutely, I agree. Although, like, I feel like in Pakistan, while TikTok is still massive, not a lot of Pakistani music has really made it huge on TikTok. So the sound, but it's also such an interesting thing that now sound is like the leading thing on TikTok. While it's visual, it's all based on the kind of sound you collect. So I feel like sound ki is the thodi bad gayi hai through TikTok over the past couple of years. But in Pakistan, I feel like it's definitely helpful to it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like if you're looking at it not as a musician, it's easier to go find your artist without having there are no record labels in Pakistan. So a musician can build their brand and come like whatever aesthetic they want to give across, whatever vibe they want to give across, they have complete creative control over that through Instagram. But then also then speaking as a musician, it's you have to build that brand. Then you have to, your music isn't enough. You just put out your music with like a picture. No one's gonna care. You have to come up with visuals that will jump out at people. You have to do photo shoots. You have to look a certain way. So that's kind of where it gets a bit messy and annoying. But it's definitely been helpful in terms of giving more younger artists a voice, which who would have totally not been given that chance through TV or other, mechanisms at all.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, sort of to go back towards what our conversation was meant to be, because I got excited when I heard Instagram. But um, when we sort of think about music and writing, we need to think about the intersection of those things. And the both of you sort of pointed out in your conversation earlier that music and journalism around music is a lot about documentation, sort of putting it down on paper, creating that, let's say, like an archive almost that this exists. How do you see that as do you see that as a problem, or do you see that as an area in which culture, writing, and music can sort of grow together? And how do we sort of move towards that goal of representing music a bit better? And maybe Anurag, you can start.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, uh, like one of the sort of examples that I can give is that we had a website here called Indecision, and then it later became NH7, and NH7 is sort of like the host of the music festival here called the NH7 Weekender, right? So they were originally a music website, like they used to cover music, they used to cover culture in a very big way, and unfortunately, like a huge bank of stories and just news and documentation is all gone now because the website doesn't really exist anymore. Like I think there are some ways that you can get it through like the archive web pages, that sort of thing, but otherwise like is the site isn't live anymore. So like there are so many artists who existed at one point of time, who collaborated maybe with like an international artist, or who did stuff like that. And like oftentimes we don't know the details, like and maybe it happened. And as like artists are a mix, like sometimes they'll be very boastful about stuff like what they did, and sometimes they would just completely keep it to themselves, and they would be like, yeah, it was no big deal. So that's where I guess like the documentation part comes in, that people can just sort of go back to see that like this sort of stuff happened. Or like these artists, like for example, like there's such a changing like demographic of people who attend music festivals in India, or just events. They didn't know that like 10 years ago a certain artist had come down to India, like from internationally. So uh, it would be the second time that they're coming to India, but nobody even remembers the first time they came to India. So that's really where documentation helps in general, like both in music as well as general like culture writing, I feel. um, and a lot of it is just important by way of not being something that's also just rewriting like whatever is given to you. Like a lot of it could be just you sort of having an opinion about it, like, or a gig review, for example, or a festival review. All those things really add to the, again, the documentation of it, right? Like, because you don't just maybe you just don't want to know how that it existed, but you want to know like what happened there and how it happened and how was it in general, right? So yeah, those sort of things are quite important.
No, I absolutely
Natasha, do you
like
have anything to
agree.
add to
It's
that?
it's it's essential to have the writing around the music, primarily also because if you're looking at an ecosystem, right? It's not just the artist's job, or and it's also it's I feel like it would in certain points be impossible for an artist to describe the role that their art is playing in that cultural moment, or for them to even like articulate what their music is at that point, right? Like it then it becomes borderline arrogance, and also like no one's listening. You want to hear someone else's voice as well, right? So that's where the role of the music writer comes in, and it's quite essential, again, as Anurag mentioned, the documentation and archiving. There have been so many artists who've been working in Pakistan for 10, 15 years, but then in award shows they'll get best emerging talent, and I will laugh at that because
Mhm.
how can you say that they have emerged multiple times, you just have not been aware, right? So I mean, it's really, for me, it's quite ridiculous that there isn't like a database that already exists, and that people aren't kind of writing more about that, or having that kind of sense of responsibility. Because as Anurag and I were discussing, essentially a press release goes out from the band which explains what it is, has the lyrics, has everything. That usually is copy pasted and then published in a newspaper. And the important
Yeah.
part also is that you need to, as a musician or as an artist of any kind, right, in entertainment, you need somebody to not only like review your work, but like, for example, I got featured in Rolling Stone, thanks Anurag, right? I had no links, no nothing. But for me, that as an artist, for me, I was like, okay, I've made some tier, like I'm relevant enough, or my music is relevant enough to have been captured on this, respectable, reputable music website. And the fact that those don't exist, or like a reputable space in Pakistan doesn't
Mhm.
exist, means that then artists are only looking towards going to corporate shows to get like that stamp of approval. Like there should be tiers to it, and I feel like music writing has a lot to play in that.
Um, so that brings me well into my next question, and that's something else I wanted to talk to you guys about before, was that I spent a little time doing entertainment writing and culture writing in general, and the biggest thing I found when it came to editors and when it came to publications was they're very nervous when I would pitch something about music. They said that, oh, it's a very polarizing topic. People have very strong opinions. You can't say one person's better than the other because then it's a tirade of social media trolls coming your way. Um, and what I felt was that there was a reluctance to research pieces. They weren't willing to give time, at least over here, where you could sort of sit down and think about music, culture in a larger sense, and research your piece and have a more balanced thing come out. So that begs the question of how do you think given this climate of getting pieces out quickly, quick news, social media news, how's that affected the way musicians and music has been represented in writing, in cultural writing and music?
Yeah, I mean,
Natasha, if you would
like,
like to.
oh yeah,
No,
go
no, go for
ahead.
it, Anurag. Go, 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 go. We'll
Okay.
always listen. Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, like I feel like generally, what's been happening, as you mentioned, Aslan, that like even me, like I've been sort of writing more shorter, newsy like stories right now, because we're expected to sort of like populate, just the websites and things like that. And additionally, there's so much music coming out that like this is pretty much how much bandwidth you can give it. But yeah, at the same time, it makes sense to have, which is where the question of like bias comes in, I guess, that like where the question of being unbiased comes in, or just where this sort of sense of perspective comes in, where you're sort of writing about an artist through a different lens. And I think this is where publications really matter, like, because like for example, like I write for India Today, but then I also write for Rolling Stone. So the way I present an artist for Rolling Stone, which is a music magazine, and the way I present, the way I write about an artist for India Today, for example, is very different. So like they want to know different things about artists. And usually editors are mindful of those things, but sometimes they aren't. Like they sort of give you a free hand and they say, you know write about it however you want to write about it. And then it's down to the journalists themselves to sort of make sure that like the way they're representing these artists is in a larger context, basically, or in a very specific context rather, so that people know that people know different aspects about it, basically. Like like, I mean, I've written about like Kashmiri artists, for example, and the way I write about them for Rolling Stone is to give more emphasis on the kind of music that goes in there. And then for other publications, general publications, I'm sort of writing about where they come from, and like why they're sort of like writing about what they're writing about, basically.
No, absolutely. I think there's so much value in having this understanding that multiple publications or multiple avenues or multiple platforms have a different purpose to play. Like, I don't expect like a top 10 listicle that's coming in a newspaper to really go really in depth. And I don't want it to, because that's not where I'm going to, kind of get to know my artist more, whatever, whoever I'm kind of trying to follow, whatever latest album release there is. Like locally, I would then turn to places like Mosiki or Hamnava to kind of learn more about what's happening in depth as per an artist. But I feel like we tend to get restricted even in social media campaigns in Pakistan to just like boosting the song, and then the post writing, whether that's an evaluation of the album, whether it's good or bad. I feel like there's not enough of that either. I feel like people tend to be also afraid because it's a small community. So people are afraid to write negative reviews. And yes, it hurts to get negative reviews, but also that does help in growing, as long as it's constructive, it would help in, growing at least a more nuanced understanding of that artist and their art. And I think there's a general fear, which there shouldn't be, which is, again, as I mentioned, the replication of press releases and things like that. Like, okay, that's the information that the artist is handing over willingly and want to promote. But what is the analysis? What is also the relevance in that cultural moment? Because music writing isn't often, as even as when you're writing music itself, it's not just about the music, right? You're writing about certain themes. How does that come across? What's happening in the world around you, what's happening around the artist's life at that point. Those themes end up, it's harder for an artist to also say those things out loud because they've already done the work of making music and giving it to you. So I think it's important to have short form kind of accessible pieces to just be like, this exists and you should listen to it and it's new. And then obviously long form pieces that enable you to have like a much more in-depth understanding, which is again something that we're trying to do with Peshkash as well, is that music from 47 to 2010 honestly does not have any kind of analysis or any kind of just kind of cultural spacing within that. What relevance did 70s surf rock have to Karachi's club scene? Was there a club scene? What does that mean? These small questions that you just kind of have to answer to give someone a better handle over how music has progressed. These So I feel like there is value in having both, and I feel like people need to be a little more opinionated, slightly in the Pakistani scene, just a bit more.
Yeah, and I feel like like just to add here, like as you go along to like the more recent years, like at least in India, what has really been sort of influencing the way artists are represented is actually public relations, like PR. Like almost everybody has a PR team on board. There is sort of like, if not a PR team, there's an artist manager now. So again, like because the Indian music infrastructure sort of developed a little bit, like all these things are in place. And they're also obviously wants to sort of dictate like how you represent an artist,
Yeah,
or how to frame the narrative itself. And there are obviously problems you'll have with them as well, in trying to tell a story a certain way. So yeah, that's a more recent issue.
definitely. And you kind of have to balance
Um,
the narratives as well. So it's definitely important to be aware that it exists for sure.
both of you have said is very important that we need to take that risk of having an opinion, because for a very long time it's been, oh, we must be safe about this. Now it's transformed more to, we must not upset the trolls online. And it becomes ridiculous to the point where you're stopping yourself from really going out there and saying the things you want to say. And I'm pretty sure if someone has an opinion, they're not going to go out and bash a band or a musician unnecessarily. There has to be some um, necessity to it or some need for that type of conversation. Um, that being said, when we talk about people approaching music writing or generally just writing about the music scene in their country, what do you think are some things that, okay, does someone need to be a musician, for example, to do that? Or is it something that they can sort of, they need to have, a particular ear for things? What are some things people can do if they want to venture into that world of uh, writing about music and entertainment and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean, even Natasha will agree. Like, I mean, you don't need to be a musician to write about music. And, like, you definitely don't necessarily even need, as you know, like a lot of musicians will tell you they're self-taught and they don't even like learn music theory and those kind of things.
Mm.
Um, so the same way, like I don't, if musicians can go about, like making just great music without having any of that, even writing about it in a way is really no biggie that way. Like you can just sort of, as long as you have, like you said, of course you do need like a keen ear in the sense of like you want to know what's going on like in the music, and you want to I suppose preferably, for example, like you could just have a good pair of headphones, for example. Those things really help
Mhm.
you like listen to like the intricacies that's going on, especially now since a lot of music is more electronic, for example. So there's a lot more attention to detail that even people are giving. So uh, that way, like when you're listening on a good pair of headphones, like you really understand what's going on, or at least you try to understand what's going on. And in my experience, like I've definitely seen artists like appreciate it more, like when you pick up on the little details that like they don't expect anybody to pick up on. It's sort of like little things that they almost do for themselves, whereas when somebody else picks up on it, they'll be like, okay, I must be doing something right. So those are the kind of things that I feel should really go into music writing. But then at the same time, it can't be just about describing music. That's not music writing. Like I've seen a lot of that happen all over, like regardless of country or anywhere. Like like one of the major things is that there's just people describing the music rather than saying how it makes, what it is a reflection of, or like what it makes people feel, or what it can make people feel. So that's where yeah, I'm gonna say adjectives. Just know your adjectives.
No, definitely. I think the major thing is that you, to be a music writer, all you really need to do is listen, like just listen actively and proactively, and then from that you will eventually get better at being able to understand what you're listening to. Differentiating between genres might be a bare minimum kind of like job description. But as Anurag mentioned, like a lot of artists, and not just artists, but the producers and the engineers end up putting up a lot of effort for just people to end up listening to these songs on their phone speakers, which hurts every musician's heart. So don't do that very often, guys, please. But I think avid listening and avid and active listening, and beyond that, just it doesn't matter what degree you have. Like truly, you could be looking at like the marketing campaign of a certain band and seeing why that is relevant or good or bad. You could be looking at their live performance and what that connection was like, or even just describing, instead of the music, the connection between the audience and the artists themselves. Talking about an artist's backstory and how you think that might fit into why their albums have changed over the past few years. So there's you
Mhm.
all you need to do is really be observant and kind of listen to what the artist, because the artist is, for the most part, like not all artists, but for the most part the artist is giving you quite a lot to work with, right? It's all kind of in the music for you to pick up on, whether it's through the lyrics, whether it's through rage metal or whatever it is. But even that has kind of more nuanced understanding than just angry music, sad music, happy music, right? So I think more and more people who, and it's better actually if musicians aren't writing about music, right? For a lot of it as well, you need voices that aren't coming from that mindset. You need voices that are being
Mhm.
impacted by that music, whether positively or negatively, from a different field entirely, which is why a lot of my favorite music writers are people who have never picked up a guitar in their life. A lot of people who have just been so proactively listening to a lot of music that they've kind of just understood what that means and how to write about that. So I'd encourage a
Yes.
lot more people who don't have that experience.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, what she said about what Natasha said about like being observant, for example, like even when it comes to reviewing events or just, reviewing festivals, like one of the first things that my editor at Rolling Stone taught me was that, like you can't just be writing about what happened, like that's a
Mhm.
news report. Like a review is about, what it feels like to be there. So that's definitely like one of the lasting things that stayed with me. And every time like I'm at a festival, I'm usually looking around to see like how what's going down and what are people feeling, like what is somebody shouting from the crowd, like is somebody heckling the artist, what are they saying, that kind of stuff.
And that is truly what makes like the experience of music itself fun, right? Like the connection that you, especially when you're reviewing something that's happening live, right? An album might be a little more boring to review because you have to develop that connection, whether positive or negative, with
Yeah.
that song. But like even with the festival, are it's like, okay, this many people attended, these are the sessions that happen. I'm like, great. Can we talk about the other stuff that happened in it? Or like we already released the schedule and the dates and the timings and all of that. So I mean, there's a lot to be written about in both, I feel, Pakistan and India at this point, in terms of how music is approached. And I feel like a lot of people feel a barrier because they're not musicians. But again, we are saying you don't have to be a musician if you feel like you have a connection with an album. It's very interesting because a lot of young women and girls in Pakistan have started writing about BTS, right, in
Nice.
Mhm.
Pakistan, right? And it's great because now I have an even deeper and more nuanced understanding of why BTS is relevant in South Asia, right? As opposed to reading something else. So while they're not describing the music, their voice, their narrative, their tone is giving me something that I can then further understand why this internationally acclaimed, Korean band is suddenly in my household.
Yeah. Yeah, I think BTS definitely has shaken things up. I think both in Pakistan and
Absolutely.
India. I mean, I've had friends really just overnight become these BTS experts, and I'm really happy. I mean, I'm glad they're writing about these things, and it shows the importance of it as well because it gets people to think about music in a different way. Um, Now, the next question that I think is very important to answer is to talk about the border that lies between Natasha and I and Anurag, and what that sort of signifies. Because at the end of the day, each country has a different perception of the other, politics aside, and that a big part of that perception comes from music, comes from culture. Our cultural exchange has been big. We've seen it with dramas, and now we are seeing it more and more with music as well. So, each one of you, could you please talk about how you see the other countries' music being perceived in your communities?
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting because like one of the first writing gigs I got at a website called First Post. Like it's a general like news and web feature sort of portal. But like one of the first things that I got asked to write about them was actually about like Pakistani artists. Like they asked me to write about Coke Studio and these kind of things. And it was very interesting because clearly nobody's an Indian website is not going to ask you to write about something that's across the border, if it's not popular, if it's like it was definitely being talked about a lot, for example, and it's definitely being consumed a lot. Like all those millions of views on Coke Studio Pakistan, as much as they do come from Pakistan, a lot of them come from India as well. So like it's all out there. And of course, like sometimes I feel like there has been a bit of bashing, like it's one of those things where there just seems to be some sort of intrinsic, like I don't know, like just some intrinsic sort of like preconception, preconceived notion about anything from like across the border. So that's been something that we really try to not think about so much, because
Mhm.
at least me as a writer personally, like I'm thinking about the story of the artist more than and of course there is cultural context, and of course there's things like that, but at the end of the day, like we're essentially thinking about the story, and it doesn't matter from where in the world this is. So definitely have got like some sort of like not worrying, but just like some concerning behavior on our social media and stuff, like even on Rolling Stone, like about when we write about Pakistani artists. But at the same time, like I have a monthly column on Rolling Stone called Beyond the Border. So that's where like I try to write as often as possible about like artists from India's neighboring countries as well as the diaspora. I'm in touch with Rearts, the label, and like they do a great job of sending me stuff on the regular. So it always helps me like keep uh, like I guess, and it wasn't this way always. Like for example, like the first time I found out about a Pakistani artist was probably Junoon, obviously, because it was on TV. It was a part of popular culture, basically,
Of
right?
course.
So it was just there, and then after like my dad used to listen to Junoon, and he had a cassette. That's how I found out about them. And then after that we saw bands like EP and Call and all these bands like really like make a mark in India, and that was obviously because nobody was saying that hey, no Pakistani artists, like they were just like, yes, of course, like this is great music, and the language I suppose is slightly different. There's maybe like slightly different words, but otherwise it's great. So I think somewhere along the way, at least thanks to the internet, like it's become a little more democratized, like where um, we can still access these sort of things without having gatekeepers, without having people telling us don't consume this or this is banned and stuff like that. So it's been really good that way for the most part. Like I think most people I know like really appreciate what's going on in the Pakistani music space, like all these bands like Taka Tak and so many other artists. Like I've been writing like about Orange Noise before this, and
Yeah,
Sikandar Kamandar and all these bands, and it's just been really great. And I hope like on a more like global level that Pakistani music gets like recognized.
that's so sweet, Anurag. But I really appreciate that, because again, from I guess the Pakistani perspective, or at least my own in experience in that sense, India, there's a tussle, right? There's an inner conflict where you want to listen, like everyone listens to Indian music on the side of the border, let's be honest, not just Bollywood. We've also developed a larger kind of taste for that, and they are also, like, for a lot of especially classical traditions, end up being that's the content that is developed far more. Not to say that Pakistan doesn't have a lot of traditional and classical musicians. It's just that content doesn't end up making it as big as, say something coming off of a T series YouTube channel, right? It's massively different. But it's and also I would like to add that India has also been that marketplace that for decades musicians have gone to get that, again, stamp of approval to level up, right? So like all of your biggest artists, the 1% that exist in Pakistan right now, have all graced Indian stages, have been a part of OSCs for whether it's a Bollywood film or an indie film, whatever it is. That is kind of like the next level up that happens, and that's what makes a Pakistani musician not national but then becomes international. Whether they come to America or whatever, that's secondary, right? Once you tap into the Indian market, and that's what all of us are kind of trying to do. You mentioned Taka Tak. I think that Taka Tak playing in India that's a dream. I would want to attend that concert. I would pay good money to see that happen, because I know that a band like that would have such a huge market in India, also because again, the border itself is arbitrary. The youth, that's also what's interesting to find through music, is that the youth experience and what you can relate to as across the border, that's all there, right? Like, so this end of the border, we're listening to Parekhan Singh, we're listening to Peter Cat recording Co, and we're going crazy and being like, oh my God, Lifafa, what's happening? What's going on? Like, we have that fandom that exists here as well for artists in India. And also even now, like through social media, a lot of the times when I'm just struggling to come up with ideas of like how to market myself, what does someone want to hear, what is a cool way of presenting myself if not a mainstream way, I will look towards India for that inspiration. And I know a lot of artists end up doing that, right? So while there is going to be constantly like I remember like a few artists, one from India, one from Pakistan, went live on Instagram early in the quarantine, and there was a notice and there was a backlash that how dare this Indian artist go live, like, and while ridiculous, these hope, like, one can only be hopeful that these surges of like hatred will eventually diminish and people will forget about this, but also that's wishful thinking. But it's also good to know that there's an entire like community of people where people like the three of us are very open to communications, are very open to engaging with both musicians and just generally people from across the border, and proud enough to just be, or okay with it enough to express our views and opinions about their music and appreciate them and support them without trolls will exist. People on Twitter will hate you no matter what you say, so you might as well go down saying whatever you want to say, right? Like, it might as well be worth it. So yeah, anyone who tells you that India is not a huge market for a Pakistani musician is lying, straight up.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think one of the favorite things that happens online for me, is at least, is a lot of my Indian friends send me music by Pakistani artists. And I'm like, hey, I've already listened to this, but thank you. And it's the same exchange that happens, because at the end of the day, if it comes down to language, I mean, it's we're there, we're at the same level. Yes, thoda uncha ho jata hai, but it's not totally different. And I think that's what really helps us to sort of have a cross-national approach to something like
Of
music.
course.
So yeah, um, but now that we're talking about like going out of our borders, I think it's important to talk about how global, the internet, not the internet, but how global culture is now. You know, um, we have all sorts of influences. You mentioned BTS. There are all sorts of different music that keeps, permeating through the internet. I found like a South African band the other day on a YouTube rabbit hole. I like that's the thing. You can sort of go in expecting one thing, and you come out of the internet with a whole wealth of knowledge. So, how do you see the global culture sort of affecting each country's music scene, and how do we take that, that beautiful mixture of every voice possible and sort of move forward, especially now that we're in this weird Zoom world, and then hopefully once we step out of it as well.
Anurag, go for it. Or do
Okay.
you want me to go? Yeah.
Yeah, you should.
I think one of the main things with the internet and again this global situation is curation. And while that seems like a fluffy word, what that means is if I have 100 songs in front of me, I don't know how to go through them. I don't know what order I would go through them in. I don't know which ones I would click on. I don't, just a simple process like that. So curation basically trims down the fat and gives you either, the best of a certain artist or a certain genre, and helps me walk through that, system. And so like while all of us are listening to Korean music, African American music, we've got, all sorts of things from, again, the cross-border exchanges, whether we're listening to folk music and trying to make that a more mainstream thing. The main thing is curation, and then the other C I will add here is context, right? So what will, like, what is Tinarivan? What kind of music are they making? Why are they, why do I see them in a desert making music? That is kind of context that you need to add for people, and it enables you to kind of relate to it more, or choose whether you can or cannot relate to it at all, right? Like rap has taken South Asia by storm, right? Because it is dealing with a certain social class and their issues, and that's something that is relatable. So like, that's gone across economic, socioeconomic segments within, and now we have things like Gully Boy. So it's gone from something that maybe 10 years ago was laughed at and seemed appropriated, but now there's a whole genre of South Asian rap and hip hop that exists within multiple languages. Even it's not just Urdu or Hindi. You got Punjabi, Sindhi. Every kind of thing is kind of like being covered now and being evolved. So I feel like obviously it's a global market. I feel like anyone, born in the 90s and beyond has only known what a global market is just because of the TV that we consume. I've consumed, English cartoons all my life, not that they were available in Urdu. Eventually we got Hindi Cartoon Network, but that happened later in the early 2000s. I mean, that exchange has always existed. The problem now is the information overload. Even for myself, I'm really exhausted by consuming music or entertainment or anything unless it is vetted by, again, that's why music writers and music and just journalists of entertainment are really good to tell you, is this worth my time? Is this something that I need to, and going into listening to a song or watching a film with a certain amount of context, not spoilers, but context, helps you engage with that a little better. So I definitely think we need to negotiate and navigate through this global, explosion of content. Like it's hard for me personally to, go through that much without a little bit of aid and context.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, what Natasha said about curation is like very much what I think at least we hope that people like turn to when, they want a little, like when they want something specific or when they just want to sort of be told what to listen to or be told what to check out. Like, I think that's where they turn to, curation basically. And of course, music publications and music writing definitely does that. And in the global context, like what we've seen is that, you know, um, like trying to keep up with it, for example, is quite a task for sure. Trying to keep up with just like how, for example, so many musicians now say that, like I'm gonna be on Spotify and I'm gonna have like this Instagram IGTV video. That's it, like nothing else, and you'll just be like, wow, like like before, like it used to be like you used to have a Facebook page, or like way before you used to have a MySpace page. So like all that stuff has really changed, and it's up to sort of like writers to really keep up with that, like in terms of how global culture is influencing just the way music is released, the way the music is written. So it, like, I mean, one of the other things, of course, is like how Spotify has come to India, like within the last 1.5 years. Like they came in February 2019. And as much as the business model of Spotify is a lot to dissect on its own, like it's just not, it's still a game changer in many ways. That's what we've seen a year and a half on. Like we've seen so much changing about uh, non film music, so to speak, like getting a leg up in India because of streaming platforms like Spotify. So yeah, again, like I said before, like this is all part of the global sort of like cultural sphere. This is part of how, like uh, the culture of the world like just sort of like comes to these two countries. And yeah, hopefully, like at least I feel like as long as there's like a little stability on the way, like as long as none of this is sort of curtailed in any way, as long as this is not like sort of I would say like police, so to speak, like I feel like that way, like the cultural consumption is going to be just fine. Like I feel like more and more there'll be more in common between the kind of music that Indians make and the kind of music that Pakistanis make. So and it's obviously already happening.
Absolutely. And again, I think the more we spend time on the internet, we sort of consume other cultures and other people's thoughts. We sort of begin to get towards that point of collaboration, working together, and having those really awesome conversations and music that comes out of it as well. So we have one really interesting question that I do want to put forward to you guys, and it's a slightly controversial one. I don't know if you feel the same way or not, but basically, this person asked about the phenomenon of Coke Studio in both Pakistan and India, and how you see it in terms of the the merit being, fusion music, making older classics more palatable for younger audiences, but then also the demerit of it being a branded thing, something that is coming from a corporation such as Coca-Cola. So if you feel that you can answer that question as to how do we sort of approach Coke Studio, how do we sort of think about it in a grander scheme? Does it actually help music or does it not? Uh, what are your stances on that?
I mean, if you look at the context of Coke Studio in Pakistan, in 2008, your TV channels had kind of music TV channels had faded. All the infrastructure that was there was, fast burning to the ground. There had been some, legal issues with certain companies that I will not name so that I don't get legally messed up. So that came and there was like a whole Coke Studio boom that happened and everyone was obsessed with it. That format was massively new for Pakistan and changed a lot of things. And initially, it didn't matter that it was a branded thing, and it especially like I think I was about 16 when it first came out, so it didn't even occur to me. I was like, cool, whatever. Cricket is constantly branded, with a cola, so this is just another cola. It's fine. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it gave us like excellent music for the most part, right? Like throughout its seasons, there were some standout tracks, and then some tracks that were very questionable. But chalo, at least there's music being made. Um, I think after having worked there and after now, kind of just seeing what the industry is at right now, I think a lot of my anger towards both the brand and the institution, or like my kind of doubts about it, came from the fact that it cannibalized an entire industry, not on purpose, right? Like I will say this, it's not completely evil, but it's just at the end of the day, it because that was the only thing that people in Pakistan either wanted to listen to because of the fact that that's the only thing that's being shown on TV channels, and you get billboards and so on and so forth, and other brands and other artists and other people would want to either replicate that model and then fail because they were trying to replicate something that they just could have done another version of, right? So brands putting in, and then another cola got involved later on in the past 3 4 years. You have Pepsi Battle of the Bands also happening. When you have brands fighting each other for marketing space for music, within that it's great because then you just also have lots of music being pumped out. Again, sometimes the music is questionable, but the fact that music is still existing in a space like Pakistan with so many issues and zero infrastructure, that's great. But I feel like one of the things I've felt over the past couple of years personally is like initially I was like, shut it down. We don't need this. We don't need any of this. Take the corporate out. They're ruining everything, right? Like lots of angst. But having seen how it works, having seen what value it has otherwise, let that exist at whatever pace it needs to exist, sure. But then there needs to be so many more non-branded Coke studios to balance out that game, that it's just about a matter of just getting that monopoly out there, getting rid of that monopoly, right? Which was inadvertent, but then as is being made use of, obviously, because it helps selling bottles at the end of the day, which is the goal, right? So I just think that there has to be more incentive and to channel the rage, I guess, that one would have against a corporate or against the show itself to providing an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, like even out here in India, like I mean, obviously Coke Studio India was not nearly as successful as the Pakistani version. Like I mean, experiment wise, sound wise, everything wise. So like I think, of course, they did churn out some great hits, and but I feel like where Coke Studio came to India, it was already sort of like well established of that whole format of music performance shows. Like they were already a thing in India. But like I do want to pick up on what Natasha said about like about like just sponsors and just corporate sponsorship. It's very much like very much existent in India for very very long, like as for as long as like international artists have come to India, or for as long as we've just had like big shows and big events, or even tours, for example. They've all been sort of somehow tied into the fact that you need a big name sponsor, like sort of stepping in. Um, so it definitely it's inescapable in a way, but at the same time, yes, like it needs to sort of encourage people to also think about, okay, we have this, we have something like Coke Studio India, but how do we do something that's still independent at the same time as like doing what Coke Studio does for the music infrastructure, basically.
Absolutely, because also your corporates are going to be the ones who can pay for this. No government institution, I feel like even in India, would be able to afford, these international acts or would ever put their money towards that if they even if they did have that money, right? I know for a fact locally that that would never happen. So you have to really you can't really be choosy, right? Like in that situation, but there has to be a sense of understanding where the brand needs to not be involved, say, with the music aspect, right? Like leave the creatives to the creatives. That's when things get messy. The times when you feel the presence of a brand within the music is when people get enraged. I feel that's when I get enraged, personally, at least. Like because you can tell what's happening, what the gimmick is, because you can see pata chal jata hai. It's very obvious even to an untrained ear and eye. I think that's where it gets messy. So like for brands that are, especially smaller brands that are considering to start their own little things, whether to compete with this or otherwise, like just stay out of the actual art and help promote it and sell whatever you need to sell.
Yeah.
That's really great, and I really enjoyed that response from both of you. Now that we're sort of coming towards the end of our session, I do want both of you to sort of give your handles so that people can follow your music, your work, and sort of to see what you guys are listening to as well, so that we can open up some more music to as many people as possible.
Let me open up my Spotify.
Natasha.
Anurag, go for it. No, Anurag. I need to check.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm on Anurag Tagat at Anurag Tagat on Twitter, and also I guess yeah, I mean it's a fairly specific name. So if you look for it on Spotify or if you look for it on Instagram, it's right there. In terms of what I'm listening to these days, it's quite a mix actually. There's usually a lot of stuff like more recently I was just listening to Wooly and the Uke because that was
Yeah, she's
something that
amazing.
came to my attention a while ago. It was just very different and just very refreshing. Uh, and then I guess apart from that, I've been listening to Underside from Nepal, like great metal band. Really, they've come to India a few times and really knocked people's socks off. So, really looking forward to whenever all this ends and a band like them can take the stage again. Um, and additionally, yeah, I guess on the Indian side, like I've just been listening to, there's a huge like singer songwriter boom here. So there's obviously and I think the good part is a lot of them are singing in a variety of languages. So it's always
Mhm.
really cool to see, people like sort of make that leap and not be, they might be influenced by artists who sing in English, but they're more emboldened to just sing in their own language because they feel like it just comes naturally to them. So there's
Mhm.
this guy called Vaisak Somanath who is from, he's from Kerala, but he sings in Tamil. So, it's just really wonderful, like because like he's singing about like eco sustainability and like the importance of homeschooling and just like living a sustainable lifestyle, which is all like really again a really breath of fresh air compared to heartbreak songs and like, oh, she left me kind of songs.
No, absolutely. I actually like that you touched upon the boom of writing in local languages. I think that's definitely been something that I've also been gravitating towards. My handle on Twitter is Rukhsana Cartoons. It's not a professional like handle to have, but I have it, so look that up. But if you look up Natasha Noorani, you'll find me on Twitter as well. On Instagram and otherwise, you can just look up Natasha Noorani and Spotify and YouTube and everything that the internet has to offer. I'm there. I have done it. And in terms of what I'm listening to on my Spotify, so I had to open this up because I just am very bad at remembering. I'm listening to a lot of Taemin, right? So my sister, who is a lot older than me, she's obsessed with BTS. But I'm recently going through a Taemin phase, who is also a K-pop solo artist from Shiny,
Mhm.
and he's very angst K-pop, and I'm into that 100%. And a lot of Moses Sumney. Locally, I've been listening to a lot of Abdullah Siddiqui. Obviously, his new album is ridiculous. Whatever he's released of it so far has been amazing. Manu is an amazing rapper who's also done a collaboration with Abdullah for this album, but his own music has also just been great. And I've been going back to Janubi Khargosh's last album quite a lot. So yeah, I think locally that's what I have been listening to quite often. So check them out.
Perfect. Thanks so much, you guys, for taking your time. and I really hope our audience also enjoyed this talk. This is one I've been really looking forward to. Don't tell the other panelists, okay? But I'm really looking forward to this one, and I'm glad that we could all talk today.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you
Thanks
so
for
much,
having us.
Aslan. Yeah, thanks, Natasha. This has been great.
Yes. All right. See you guys.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.